So it turns out that schools and hospitals are literally falling apart. The schools have just gone back this week. And as soon as they stepped through the door, on the eve of pupils returning to classrooms, over 100 had to close at least partially or fully because in the 80s they built them with really rubbish concrete. They've known about this for ages and they just haven't done anything. And now it looks like the roofs might literally cave in on a bunch of children's heads. So just another thing that is declining and deteriorating right before our very eyes. The collapse just doesn't cease, does it? Speaking of bugs, or rather features of industrial society, if you'd like to subscribe to our website for as little as £5 a month, you can get all of our premium content, including our book club series and the latest episode where Carl and Josh decided to go through Ted Kaczynski's The Industrial Society and its future, so the Unabomber's Manifesto. Of course, we cannot endorse any of the Unabomber's Manifesto because, well, he was the Unabomber. But he makes some interesting observations about how industrial society slowly renders human beings obsolete as things get more and more complex, and how that will lead to deterioration and alienation from the environment.
Yeah.
Good points, bad solutions. Anyway, speaking of useless solutions, this is a whole list of all of the schools that are on the precipice of closure. I'm going to be citing the Times for quite a lot of this because they've done quite a lot of Freedom of Information Act reporting and the likes. And the government is shutting 156 schools at the time of writing. This is on Monday, and this is confirmed to have RAAC inside their buildings. 104 of them will have to partially or fully shut. Now, the RAAC is reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete. So you know those like light grey breeze blocks that you see?
Yeah.
They've just been sticking them in there. They suck up moisture and they slowly erode over time because they're not very strong. And they've been using those in roofs.
So basically the whole environment is completely inhospitable.
Yeah, it's structurally unsound. And they've been doing that in a bunch of buildings because it was cheap, it was easy to knock up. This is kind of the prefab building philosophy of where you can take it out of a flat pack assembly thing and knock up a block of flats or a government building in an afternoon.
And I'm sure there are issues with mold there.
I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know of any, but if there's moisture retention, probably. And any sort of brick and mortar bricklayer will be able to tell you this was a bad idea from the off. Brick and mortar lasts, whereas these new buildings just get knocked down after a few years because they don't stand. That's what they've been doing with China, with loads of the ghost cities. They knock them up cheap to register on a state development graph. Because no one lives in them, they then pull them down, and it's an excuse to go and keep building again. So this is the National Audit Office, and they surveyed 196 schools, and they found RAAC in 65 of them. 24 needed emergency action. A further 572 schools were then surveyed by the Department of Education. The Audit Office found that 38% of English state school buildings, that's 24,000 in total, had already passed their recommended lifespan. So 24,000 buildings are already obsolete. They need updating or even pulling down because they're not fit for purpose. And yet no maintenance is being done, no investments being done, and kids are sitting in possible death traps.
Yeah.
Because we just don't have the wherewithal or possibly even the skills on hand. I mean,
but the weird thing is that the government does not seem to be hesitant to tax people.
No.
So it's not that there aren't enough taxes.
Yeah, but have you considered that we need to pay trillions in climate reparations to nuclear-armed Pakistan? There's nothing to say to that, exactly. Angus Drummond from the RAAC Consulting and Solutions said his firm's working hypothesis was that about 10% of UK schools around 2000 could be severely affected. And in 2018, they did a substantive review and they found that 700,000 pupils were attending a school that needed rebuilding or refurbishment. So that's not great. Dame Rachel D'Souza, the Children's Commissioner for England, she criticised the government's handling of this issue because it's been known about for years. Quote, "I'm extremely disappointed and frustrated there wasn't a plan in this for this happening," she told the BBC. "The government might not have known that it would happen this week, but it knew that there was something, there knew was stock in this situation." So first it was the concrete. Now there's asbestos. So for people that don't know, asbestos is a potentially lethal building material.
It's not good to inhale it.
No, it can cause lung cancer and all the like. So asbestos could be exposed in the schools by that crumbling concrete because asbestos has been built up. As long as it isn't revealed, it's totally fine. But as soon as the building starts to deteriorate and you inhale it, you might get lung cancer. There are fears that such a scale of the problem is that some schools may even have to be demolished. Asbestos contributes to 5,000 deaths of Brits every year, and it's present in more than 80% in schools. It said that in some situations, the RAAC planks may have even been coated in Artex, a material that contains asbestos. So you've got a double whammy there of really dangerous and stupid building materials that probably should have been updated when we found out how bad they were. But again, the decline is just stewarded. It's not being reversed. And this is the ex-engineering chief. So this is Dr. John Roberts, who is president at the Institution of Structural Engineers. He helped build the London Eye. So, I mean, it's a bit of a monstrosity, but he at least knows what he's doing. He wrote an open letter to the Times because he was quite upset about this situation. And he said, as a chartered structural engineer in active practice since the early 1970s, I have never considered using RAAC as I did not feel it was correct for permanent structures. He explained that the aerated blocks, breeze blocks, are used extensively to this day because the air bubbles in the material provide a huge insulation benefit. He said the material was safe to use in walls, but the problem arises when it's reinforced with steel and used in roofs to span wide spaces. If it's used in a roof and there's any kind of moisture up there, the steel bars will rust. The rust causes expansion because rust occupies about 6 times the volume of the steel that is turned into rust, so you might get expansion and cracks, and that's what can cause the concrete to fall. I included that because I was not nearly smart enough to have explained that, and he's done that in a very, very sound way. And so we'll look at some of the schools here. And the reason I've included this is because this is one of these schools in here is St Thomas More's in Eltham, near me. And I know someone who's explained this to me. What happened in this school is that the dining halls, the toilets, and the sports halls and a few of the classrooms had to shut because of this exact problem. And so now not only do the kids have to eat outside under a marquee, so they'll be dropping all their packed lunches and sandwiches everywhere, and they don't actually get to go in and have a hot meal because the kitchens are shut, which means it will attract rats because it's right opposite a main road. But because the toilets are shut, that's opposite the school gate, basically. So, like,
that seems like a festival.
Yeah, they've started.
Yeah.
So there was an old TV soap drama that's been revitalized recently called Waterloo Road, and so they've taken to calling the school Portaloo Road. Because it looks like a car boot sale. This is not the fault of anyone that actually works at school, really. They just didn't have access to the funding or the resources in order to get this problem addressed, and the can's been kicked down the road by the government, specifically the Department for Education.
Yes, but I'm sure that right now they're saying that this is a temporary solution.
Yes, it's until Monday.
Yeah, it's until Monday, mid-August 2029.
Well, on Monday, apparently they're putting up metal scaffolding within the school to keep the roof up so they can go and use the toilets. But like, what else can the teachers really do? In all fairness,
teachers cannot do much.
Exactly,
but it's not their job to do it.
Exactly, it's the government's job because you centralised education. I would prefer that education be decentralised, but I suppose I'm just a far right conspiracy theorist. Whatever. And then there's also happening in hospitals. That's quite interesting. So, that massive NHS waiting list that's also killing people off. But it turns out that even if you do get an appointment at a hospital, the roof might just cave in on your head and kill you anyway, which I suppose is slightly better than sometimes some of the treatment you're going to get in this country. This is West Suffolk Hospital. It was told in April that its main building risked a likely and catastrophic caving in. The report said that if the building gave way, it would cause loss of life and major injury at the 500-bed hospital. Asbestos and dust inhalation was also cited as a risk at the Bury St Edmunds unit. So if you go to hospital to treat lung cancer, you might also come out with worse lung cancer. There are at least 41 other hospitals and 6 courts also closing over this risk. Again, something they've known about for ages. The buildings are literally falling apart.
And there are huge spendings going on. So, for instance, in the NHS, there are kits with, let's say, 20 materials, 20 tools that may be helpful for a particular operation or something. And very frequently, doctors may need just 1 or 2 of them from that kit, and they throw the whole of it away.
Well, lots of the problem with the NHS is bureaucratic bloat at the top, and their ability to keep things on file and communicate is very antiquated. They still use fax machines in the age of email and immediate document scanning. And so more people at the top, money's trickling upwards, particularly to the diversity czars, getting paid $70,000 a year, whereas people on the front lines aren't getting paid nearly as much as inflation. The resources are being rationed because the amount of money that's going to care resources cannot meet the demand by the amount of people coming into the country. And then the buildings are literally crumbling because no one's paying attention to them.
And yes, and unfortunately, this is a huge problem with many institutions because you see that there are, let's say, huge incentives for people to just use them not in order to deliver a particular service,
but for personal enrichment.
And also for political support. And you regularly see this. The more governments become centralized, and the more they increase their reach within the economy and society, they regularly have more and more people who are less meritorious. Why? Because they attract voters. So the more we have centralization, the more centralization we have, the worse the product gets, because people who deliver these products and services, they are not hired on, let's say, on a meritocratic agenda. They're hired because they are going to help some people to virtue signal.
Yeah, and if the demand is exponentially increased year on year, then that manufacturers consent to continue to increase at record levels the budget for the institution, even if they're not delivering as promised. And so, because the budget keeps swelling and people still need it, and they have a monopoly on healthcare in particular in this country, or education, then what happens is, even if you aren't delivering the service, there is no accountability for the people who are often unionized and can go on strike and revoke the service at any time to be market competitive in their behaviors in delivering that service. And so when the service stops working, people just don't get fired.
Yes.
And the complacency continues until the thing falls apart around you, as we're seeing. And so there was an open letter recently. This was the NHS bosses across hospitals, across England, all the NHS trusts, and they've told their staff to be ready to evacuate staff and patients if the buildings start falling apart. So this is NHS England, and they issued the instructions to all 224 health trusts on Tuesday. So this was yesterday at time of recording. The letter was sent to the chair, chief executive, and estate leads for all 224 trusts and 42 integrated care boards across England, which are the regional groupings of the NHS trusts. So all of the hospitals have received advance warning, because they don't know the scale of this problem yet, because this hasn't been fully investigated, that your hospital may collapse around you at any time and kill all your patients and staff. But we're meant to be a first world country. Yet, the complacency, the staffing full of diversity hires, the personal enrichment over the accountable delivering of services has led to a situation where we have inherited a civilization that we could not only not reconstruct because we don't have the competency in many of these complex systems, but also we can't keep it running because as soon as problems arise, we just don't know how to fix them. We'll paper over the cracks rather than properly plaster them. It's like, have you seen the film Brazil?
No.
Yes.
But I know that you have been talking about it.
I've referenced it a couple of times because I saw it fairly recently, and Josh and Harry have a video coming out on it soon. But what ends up happening in it is that it's a satirical version of Orwell's 1984, except the government constantly keeps the people in fear because it keeps talking about terrorists. And there are always explosions going off. We don't know who the freedom fighter terrorists really are. It's just a dream in the protagonist's head. And so you end up coming up with a theory that it's just complex systems breaking, and people are attributing the cause to air ducts exploding and gas mains exploding because they can't be maintained to revolution, when actually it's just people at the top are so stupid and so mired in bureaucracy, they can't continue upkeeping this civilization.
Yeah.
So that seems to be.
But you see, there's constantly a shifting of responsibility and blame to other people. There's always a blame game. So, for instance, instead of saying that, well, there is enough taxation or maybe there is excessive taxation, let us rationalize our use of taxes. They are just saying, no, let's do nothing of that and let's just ask for more taxes.
Oh, here's a perfect example of that. So this is the Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, the woman who said that students can choose their identity from 16 onwards. And I can't say more about that because we're on YouTube, but I disagree.
What does she think about children who are 15? You don't have to answer.
Because there is no logical answer, of course. If we can just play this clip, because I think this exhibits the kind of arrogance typical of the government that has been in place for 13 years. They are Blairites, so I am not a fan of the Labour Party either, for anyone who's just stumbled on this channel and doesn't know how we feel over here. And the Conservatives don't understand why they are losing. Well, it's because of the complacency and conceit demonstrated in this offhand remark.
But we will get a plan, and every single one of them will be done.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just two moments
Does anyone ever say, you know what, you've done a good job because everyone else has sat on their and done nothing? No signs of that, no?
Well, no, because you've sat on your arse and done nothing. Again, 13 years. You knew about this problem 5 years ago. Like, not specifically her, because they keep cycling through education secretaries, mainly because they're all so incompetent and because they imprison children in their homes for 2 years and impair their development irrevocably. But do you really think you look good doing this? I mean, I know ITV released this outside the parameters of their down-the-camera interview, but I'm glad they did. And I know ITV News just want to topple the government because their political path stands because they support Labour, even though there's no there's like a cigarette paper's width between the two, but it does show the utter contempt and only self-concern that the political class have, and they regard us, who, plenty of people have their kids or their loved ones stuck in these schools and hospitals. They just regard them with, well, yeah, it might be a threat to your life, but why don't you give me a pat on the back? I'm the one that's truly oppressed. I'm the one that's just not being thought of here. And the arrogance just frustrates me. And then after,
and it is not just that they came up with a plan; is that they will come up with a plan.
Yes, they don't know what to do about it. Yeah.
It would be ridiculous either way, but it's way more ridiculous this way.
Yes, and then so when she was asked, do you regret saying that? Well,
her eyes suggest the answer.
Yeah, well, so she retweeted this thing to Sky News, and she said, "I'm sorry for my off-the-cuff remark about my choice language earlier. I know parents are concerned. I've been working non-stop to resolve this issue as quickly as possible." Now, I didn't put a clip in here because then she went later on BBC Radio and said head teachers need to get off their arse and do things about this, and then laughed. So she still believes this.
Yeah.
She still believes it's just the head teacher's fault, despite the Department of Education holding all the purse strings and knowing about this problem for ages and not communicating the problem. Whatever. I just wanted to play this video of her non-apology response, because she practically doubles down while also saying, I apologise.
I mean, you apologise for the language, but it showed you're frustrated and that you think some people aren't doing enough. I mean, is it councils? Is it your predecessor here at the Department for Education? Is it the Prime Minister?
No, it's not. It's nobody in particular. But, we've had a change of evidence, which has happened very, very recently. And that's where we've had ceilings, which are graded as uncritical, non-critical, so you could keep them in action, where there've been failed panels. Now, that means that we need to find out where they all are. Now, we've done a really good job, the department and everybody, we've been working really hard on this. We've done a really good job at identifying 156, but we've got more surveys to do where we've had the questionnaires back, so we're working on those the next 2 weeks. But we've still got some questionnaires we need to get back. And without that, we can't really make the first step.
Is what's frustrating
No, it's whoever it is. Anybody who can give us the questionnaires back would be very gratefully received. To be fair, the evidence has changed very recently. It was only last Thursday.
And who's to blame for that? You're obviously frustrated with someone.
Actually, it was the interviewer, because the interviewer was making out it was all my fault. So, and that's what I was saying. Do you ever go into these interviews where everyone ever says anything but, you've just done a terrible job? And he was basically saying, all these things. I mean, he mentioned 1994, he mentioned 2018. I mean, they were all,
I mean, it's partly because he'd done a lot of work, a huge FOI back in March, so it wasn't new information in August. We were reporting
it wasn't
on
new.
this.
The new information was the 3 cases that came to light over the summer. So way after his freedom of information, it was new information that came to light, where those that are assessed as non-critical, there were panels that failed, and I was able to send in our structural chartered surveyors, and they went in and said, yes, these are assessed as non-critical, and they've failed. That's new. That's why we've changed the advice. It's very recent, and I do understand, by the way, the frustration for parents and for children. But safety has to come first. And when you have that happening, you have to act on it. Now I need everybody else to give me all the information I need so I can make sure that we can mitigate the situation and minimise the disruption on children's education.
Sorry, what has she done? Because what did she do that she thinks that she deserves so much credit?
Yeah, exactly. Well, did you notice that throughout all of that, when she was asked who are you actually frustrated with, she only blamed the interviewer who put the camera in her face and asked her to explain where the buck stops. But she can't allocate blame to any single institution or person or even her predecessors. And so she's just caught in this trap of where she's just not being honest. And then she says, oh, the evidence changed. What? The evidence changed from 1994 with the original knowledge where you knew this wasn't structurally sound. Then 2018 where you had 5 years worth of data of knowing exactly which places on this list were not a good idea and that they might be caving in. There was another place, I think it was a primary school, about 1 or 2 years ago now, that actually did have its roof cave in while no one was in the school. So they knew this was an issue. Oh, but the evidence changed. This reminds me of the pandemic. Oh, the science is settled. Oh, wait, the science has changed. Never mind the fact that we were just making really terrible policies beforehand. Actually, it says we didn't have the right information. Suddenly we now have the right information. So the party is always correct, comrade.
And it fits with attack on free speech, because it's the job of the interviewer or the reporter to be critical.
Yes. And
it's not
they often
their job to basically present them in a Pravda style that, hey, MP, you're God's gift to human nature.
Yeah, especially not because most of these people are midwits. And again, not like the mainstream media has that as their principle. They're still political partisans, but you're correct. The politicians should not be expecting they should be expecting fair treatment, which means scrutiny, not flattering treatment. And she's not. I don't think Gillian Keegan's even remotely smart enough to use it as a politically savvy tool. She's just taking it personally that, like, oh, well, you're blaming me. Yeah, because it's your job to fix it. But I wanted to finish on this. It's not like the other party are going to fix it, of course, because the Labour Party, the government incumbent at this point, because the Conservatives, hashtag 13 years, have been continually screwing up, despite a few backbenchers that want to change it, they've made a smart play. And this was a play that I haven't seen anyone else analyse. Keir Starmer had a cabinet reshuffle. Now, he's appointed some pretty terrible people, like the Shadow Justice Secretary was one of those women that signed a petition that kept migrant criminals that were going to be deported grounded on the tarmac, so it never took off. But one of the people that has been appointed is Angela Rayner, Rory's girlfriend. And so she has been moved up. She's not just Deputy Prime Minister. She's been moved to Shadow Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. Now, the reason that's significant is because the person that's currently occupying that position is Michael Gove.
Yeah.
Roundly hated by the public, particularly people like me who had to go through his education sector reforms as GCSEs struck and it screwed up our GCSEs, and also bad reforms to A-level systems, and anyone who is in the housing sector because he keeps doing really bad housing policy and won't address the demand problem, only the supply issue, which will never keep pace with demand. And also, he is just a bastion of the last 13 years of Conservative complacency because despite his incompetence, he has failed upwards. He knows where the bodies are buried. He has been a failed leadership candidate twice. He helped assassinate Boris Johnson's original bid at it and then helped him get in. And so lots of the failings can be laid at the feet of Michael Gove. Angela Rayner, one of the most vociferous Labour Party ambassadors, a lot more firebrand both in hair and in voice than Keir Starmer, who's meant to be the stable robot leading up the Labour Party, is now going opposite him on issues like housing, on HS2, on the issues that matter to the Red Wall they're trying to re-win, and the hospitals and schools that are crumbling. Yeah. So it's very astute that the Labour Party have put her in this position to capitalise off of the various infrastructure crises that the Conservative Party have presided over. But again, they're not going to fix it. And so the decline will continue, unabated, utterly relentless, because everyone is incompetent and everything's made out of rubbish. I love Britain these days.
You appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters. You can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the book clubs, this one on Ted Kaczynski, the Industrial Society and its Consequences. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.